Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, Las Vegas. Welcome to Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends on Hot 702.5 FM. Today, I have a very special guest who's joining us. She is the granddaughter of one of the most famous couples in Western film and television history, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. Julie Rodgers Pomilia. She's here to talk about her new book. As we all know, Roy and Dale were the royal Western couple, heroes to many of us. But to Julie, they were simply grandma and grandpa, having lived through the height of their popularity in the 50s and 60s and into today's times where their impact on American culture is sometimes forgotten. Julie's unique perspective is one that we can't wait to hear. Through her book, Julie shares personal experiences about the love and acceptance that her grandparents exuded as they adopted 5 children from different walks of life and culture. She combines the yours, the mine, the ours, the step, the adopted, the foster, to make a total of 9 children. I can't even take care of myself, so I can't even imagine 9 children. And we can't wait to learn more about what it was like growing up with such an iconic couple. So Julie, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to hear everything you have to say. And I'm so looking forward to calling you a new friend. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited you invited me.
Oh my God, absolutely. So what prompted you to write this book?
Well, you get to a certain age and you feel like your grown kids don't really know how you grew up, and it becomes important to you to pass that on. And so a couple Christmases ago, I decided I was going to just write a book to them and get it copied at Kinko's and just have it like a homemade gift of my past growing up with my grandparents. I go to Western festivals a lot, and people would ask me, you have such great stories, you need to write a book. And I'd say, well, I'm writing it to my sons though. And along the way, everybody encouraged me to broaden my audience and get it published so that they could read it too, because there was a lot of interest out there. And I thought, well, okay, why not? So I did, and I have a book.
I think that's so amazing. I was actually talking to my mother earlier today, and I was like, do you remember Roy and Dale Rogers? And she's like, of course, happy tales
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
That's so amazing, because when I was read your book and I was reading like all parts of it, and it's like you didn't even understand that they
No.
were your grandparents.
No, I didn't really until people outside the family started pointing it out to me. That's when it became real, when I saw that other people knew my grandparents, and I was like, what's this? What is this all about?
Yeah. How old were you when that happened?
Well, I was in 2nd grade, and my teacher, my grandpa showed up on the cover of the Weekly Reader, a huge picture of him on the Scholastic News, which we still
The
use.
Weekly Reader. I miss the Weekly Reader. I remember the Weekly Reader.
I would still use that. I'm a teacher.
Do the Weekly Reader still is a thing? Oh my God, I loved the Weekly Reader.
I know. And she called me up, and she pointed down to this stack of Scholastic News, and she said, do you know who this is? And she was all excited, and I thought, why is she acting like this? But I responded, yeah, that's my grandpa. And she just took off, and she was so excited. And I thought, this is really weird. And I went home that day and I said, what in the world happened to my teacher today over the grandpa's picture on the Weekly Reader? And so I asked lots of questions. They told me a little bit more. And that was my small beginning of finding out that they had a huge effect on other people as well as just family,
Yeah. So did you not were they not still on the air when you were a little kid, or?
No, they were very active in the media, and they were followed. We would be followed by, reporters and people wanting their autograph and things like that. Their show had just ended the year before I was born, so it was already going into reruns. But they were still at the height of their popularity. They were on rodeos, and they were on specials, guest specials, and talk shows, and they were very visible. We just got used to it. I thought everybody's grandparents had a TV show. And
as well they should.
Yeah. I mean, that was my normal. And, normal is whatever you grow up with, really. That's all you know. That's what I thought everybody knew. Yeah. And every bit of the way, I found out more and more, no, that's not what everybody's grandparents do.
Where were you raised?
I was raised in LA. We lived in Montrose, this little town by Pasadena, a little bit. And then my grandparents lived out in the San Fernando Valley in Chatsworth. They had this magical ranch that we just used to run around and play so many hiding places. They had chickens and ducks and cows and peacocks and sheep. And then, and they actually used their back property to film. So they could put on their makeup in their bedroom and walk back out the back door, and they were on set, and it looked like a Western set. They had 300 acres, and it was just a lot of land that looks like those Westerns when you see the Westerns.
So, but nobody that you grew up with in LA had like Hollywood connection. Like, you didn't grow up with any other people whose parents were in the business? Even like not talking about, oh, my father's an actor, but like, oh, my father's
it's so and so
the accountant on the Columbia lot or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of people around, but as a little girl, you don't pay attention to it. And I didn't go to school out in Chatsworth. I went to school, in Pasadena. So
you were kind of away from LA a little.
I was away from where they were living, and people that they knew, and they would come in and out of the house. Clark Gable could walk into the house, or Burt Reynolds, or any of those people, and they were just, as far as I knew, the same kinds of people as somebody from their church that was bringing a pie over or something like that, or a neighbor. I mean, because they treated everybody the same. Goodness, we had so many different people in our family. We didn't see all the ethnic differences and the culture and the color and everything that is so much in the news today. We just were brought up with, hey, we're all different, every one of us. Because I had an aunt from Korea. I still have an aunt that is Native American. I had another aunt from Scotland, and I had another uncle who had special needs because he was beaten badly in his head as a child and abandoned, and so he was a little bit slow in talking. So we just grew up to accept everybody, and it was wonderful because there was no pecking order. Nobody was better than anybody else because nobody was related to anybody. I mean, you were either hers, his, adopted, or foster. And, so it was crazy, but it was fun. It was a happy chaos kind of place.
Totally. So as a kid, like, did you grow up like wanting to go into show business? Was show business even like a thing? Was a thing? Or did you grow up like thinking like, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a teacher, which you're an educator?
I am. No, I actually was interested in the backside of production because we were on the Jonathan Winters show. He was an old comic that had a variety show, and all of us were on that show. And when we walked out on stage, I was really more interested in all of the, all the cables running and all the, camera people and the cue cards and the gaffers and the just, all these different jobs that are going on in this tangled mess behind the scenes. And I thought that looked way more interesting than being on stage, even though on stage was fun. And we were on TV a few times with them, but I was always interested in the other part. But my dad discouraged me from it, my mom and dad, because they had seen the dark side of Hollywood. So they said, you're such a good teacher, why don't you go into teaching? And if I were who I am now, I would have gone into movie production. But who I was then, I'm glad I was who I was. That's okay. But I've grown a lot, but I became a teacher.
But when you say the dark side of Hollywood, they saw the dark side. Like, what was it that they were afraid that you might fall into?
Well, they were afraid that I would lose myself in it. There were so many people that, even back then, that just kind of lost their way, whether it was with drugs or financial problems or just loss of relationships in your family. I don't know, just losing who you are. And my grandparents were all about being true to yourself and don't slide your margins according to what somebody else wants you to be. So I really was getting a good promotion for Hollywood from them, but my parents, being the parents, were a little bit more protective, and they did not encourage us to go into that. But I could have later on. I just didn't.
You just didn't. No, totally. So can you tell our audience a little bit about how your grandparents got into the business?
Well, Grandma was always wanting to be in big musicals from when she was a little girl. She would just sing at the drop of a hat, and she wanted to be an actress.
And she was from where?
She was from Texas, Uvalde, Texas. She could sing, and she sang a lot. And as she was in her early 20s, she got into radio. And I mean, she took the hard path, the hard way, definitely, because she had 3 marriages before my grandpa. And her
Who
first
hasn't?
Yeah. You're funny. You're really funny. My grandma had my dad. She got pregnant at 14, had my dad at 15. So that's how our side of the family came to be. He was her only biological son. And then grandpa on the other side, he would have never become any kind of Hollywood player at all, actor, singer. He was a backwoods country boy. He went barefoot with overalls, and he was bashful, really painfully shy. And he would have he was going to be a dentist. And his family moved west out to California to make a better life. And on the way, he sang and picked up a little money with his guitar. And when he got out there, his sister literally pushed him onto the stage to be in a talent show. From there, things just started rolling. He got in a little group, and this group went into a bigger group, and they got a name, and they started singing for some of the movies for background parts. He just kind of fell into it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did they meet?
Well, she was cast as his leading lady in a Western, and she lied and said she knew how to. Well, first she lied and said she knew how to dance, and she was up for a screen test with Fred Astaire. And you don't really bluff your way through a dance routine with Fred Astaire.
Totally, but you still lie and say,
yeah,
you say, yeah,
I can do anything. Yeah, I got this. So they said, no, you're not going to dance with him. That's fine. Let's have you over here. Can you ride a horse? Oh, sure, I can ride a horse. I'm from Texas, aren't I? She didn't know how to ride a horse either. So she walks on set, and Grandpa was very gentlemanly, but he said later, she didn't know one end of the horse from the other. She didn't know which side to get on. And when she did get on and she was trotting away, he never saw so much daylight between a woman's rear end and a horse in his whole life. She bouncing all over that saddle, about to come off. And he gave her some tips during their show, and she became a decent rider. Not like him, but she got through it. But she didn't like her horse Buttermilk very well. She didn't have the kind of horse that Grandpa had. He had a dream horse, Trigger, but Buttermilk was a little nasty.
So what was it that, because we think about these iconic couples, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Yeah. And your grandparents, at what point were they like, oh, we have something here and we can turn this into something?
When did they think they were something as a couple?
Yeah.
She didn't want to be a cowgirl, but she didn't complain. She just did her best. Pretty soon, it was really the fan mail that started writing in saying how much they really loved her being the leading lady over some of these other leading ladies he had. It was driven by that, really. It just worked. I mean, their chemistry on screen was so amazing. They just played off each other because she was very city girl, kind of conceited when she'd come on, and he would wear her down, and she would become nicer and softer. And it just was kind of this little recipe that they had for all of their movies where she played a certain type of person.
It's like the pre-Green Acres. It's like the pre-Green Acres. Like
she was not, and in real life, she was not a country girl either. She was a city girl and he was a country boy. So they were really much playing themselves.
So as they like, so they met on set. Was it, as far as being a couple, like how did that happen? Like okay, like did the coupling happen first, or did the chemistry on set and as actors happen first?
No, she didn't like him at first because they had the same manager, and the manager kept talking him up and Roy this and Roy that, and his star was up and rising really fast and hers was not. So she was a little bit jealous of him, I think, and she had never met him, and she was like, Roy this and Roy that. I'm just tired of hearing about this guy. Well, the minute she walked on set, I mean, you couldn't help but not just love him. He was so sweet, and everybody liked him. And so she felt that too. They were just friends. She was married and he was married. And then they had a little boy, my Uncle Dusty, a couple of years later. And his wife died in just shortly after Dusty was born. And about the same time, my grandma, her husband was leaving and divorcing her. So they found themselves single, and they were just really good friends because, you spend like 19 hours a day on set with each other. And so they were already.
So you end up with the showmans.
Yeah. Yeah. And they knew each other so well that they were good friends first. And
yeah.
So yeah, it worked.
What is your mother? Because so your grandmother had your mother really, really young.
No,
what
my
is
dad.
your mother?
My dad.
I'm sorry?
She had my dad. Yeah, my dad.
She has your dad. I'm so sorry. I'm so
That's
sorry.
Okay. And, our family's a little confusing. So I'll give you a break here.
But so your mother had your dad really young, right?
Yeah.
You said she's really young. So what initially, what was his thoughts? Like, was it like, who is this guy? Or like, what was that like?
My dad was such a unique person. Nothing bothered him. And he could have grown up to be very resentful and bitter about the way he was raised, because he did a lot of going back and forth because she wanted him, but she also wanted to be a star. And she didn't want to give him up to her mother because she wanted my dad. And but she couldn't have it all and have it all really great at the same time. So he kept coming and going from the farm in Texas, which was actually the best place for him. And he called my great grandmother, which was his grandmother, my grandma's mom. He called her mom, and he called his own mom, Dale, Francis. And I think that would just mess the bejeebers out of me. I don't know how I would be able to figure all that out at such a young age, but he just went with it. And he knew it was his mom, but he called her, Sassy, actually, because he couldn't say Francis at first. He called her Sassy and called his grandma Mom. And then later on, when he started calling grandma Mom, he called both of them Mom. And that was okay. Yeah, that was okay.
Yeah. Did he go into show business?
No, he didn't. My grandma wanted him to. He was definitely made for it because he was so insanely talented musician. He played the flute and he majored at USC in music and was a conductor and stuff. But he really wanted to teach children, so he became a teacher. He wanted to teach music, and he loved my grandpa, and my grandpa loved him immediately. So it worked. It just worked.
Well, of course they did. Was your mother a teacher as well, or
yes?
I see your father was a teacher. So you
wonder why I became a teacher. And there we go. Yeah.
What do you teach? What grade? What subject? What do you teach?
Well, I have a multiple subject credential, so I teach anything from kindergarten through 6th grade, and right now I'm teaching 3rd grade. So,
that's a really interesting age. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, my teacher, his name was Lester Zimba. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and I remember I loved Mr. Zimba so much. And every Monday morning, he and I would always have like this 10 or 15-minute moment where we would always recap what happened on Saturday Night Live the weekend before.
But you were going to say something completely different. I wasn't ready for that.
But like I remember loving Mr. Simba, and we could, because like when I feel like when you're in third grade, you're like what, 8, right? You're
Yeah,
like 8 in third grade.
yeah,
And that's when you're like you're old enough to really understand, like you're not an adult, like you're not really old, but
yeah.
you're old enough to really get what's going on.
Right, and to
And
get
so you can
jokes and stuff, and yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Is that why how long have you been teaching that grade?
Well, I've taught it several times, but this year is I'm coming back to it after teaching kindergarten for a long time. I've been teaching 34 years, so I've
Oh.
taught everything. And
Oh. What's your
yeah,
favorite grade to teach? Because like to me, and this is someone who doesn't have kids and who when I'm like so it's really funny for me because like I think about this, right? Like I've never every place that I've worked, like I don't work in an industry. Well, I guess I work in an industry where there's kids, but I've never like had kids in my sphere.
yeah.
I've never lived in a building or in a, in a neighborhood where there's like a lot of kids around. And I'm an only child, so I don't have like nephews and nieces. So when I encounter a little kid, I'm a little like, what do I do? Would you like a cigarette? Would you like a drink? What do you do? Like, what would you like?
You
So
do. What did you find to do? Oh,
but like
that's
a,
oh, you're hilarious. Yeah, no, probably not a cigarette. That'd probably be a no-go for that one. Um, but yeah, they keep you young and they keep you on your toes, and they're very blunt, and I love it because they usually don't have any kind of ulterior motive. They're just curious and they just want to know stuff.
but they're
Um,
kind of mean, aren't they? Like they
it can
sometimes
be.
say things that are just like, whoa. Like
Yeah,
if your friend said it, you would be like, this woman, I have to like.
yeah. Well, they can be, but they don't. But they're very soft-hearted too, because if they think that they have upset me or anything, then they feel so bad. And even the toughest ones, I get under their skin, and we usually have a really great relationship. I have with even the ones that are kind of the outliers that don't want to be there, or they have some issue. um
Mhm.
Usually I end up having a really great relationship with most of my students.
Yeah.
So it's
Do
good. I
you
learn a lot about myself.
Yeah, totally. Do you have, because like, like I think about like, 'cause I can remember like being a teacher is one of those things where you're really a star because everyone remembers you.
Oh yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
like, oh, this is my, Mrs. Winsky was my second grade teacher. Mrs. Nelson was my first grade teacher. Mr. Zemba was my third. Do you
See?
have like do you remember your students, like like you said you've been teaching for 35 years? Do you like have people who come up 20 years later is like, oh my goodness, I love you, and you're like, who the hell is this?
Who that? Yeah, you know what? I hate saying that, but you do, because there's so many kids along the way. But I usually, well, I've always remembered who it is when they tell me who it is. A lot of times you can't even tell who it is because they look, they're adults now. And the last time I saw them was when they were a first grader. So, there's no way that I would know who they are just off the bat. But when they tell me, I usually do remember them.
Yeah.
And I have people coming back to me saying, writing me or finding me somehow on Facebook or something, saying, you were my favorite teacher, I loved you. And
And
it's
you're
really,
like, good.
yeah, I mean, it really makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're doing something good in the world. And
Yeah.
besides teaching math and reading, because I tell them, you know what, you guys, I care more about the person you're becoming right now than your math scores, your writing, all that. That's important. But who you're going to be when you're my age is who you're becoming now. And I care about who you're becoming and the choices you make. And
What's the I'm sorry, keep
no,
going.
I always tell them, my dad always told me that it's easy to look, you can either look at the bad or the good, and whichever one you do gets easier to do. So, make the choice to look at the good and choose the good, because it's going to become a habit. You know, whatever you do the most of
Totally.
becomes a habit. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. This is again, like I don't have any children. I don't have any nieces or nephews as an only child. But
Yeah.
that's the thing that always scares me about children, because you're totally like molding these people,
Yes.
and
Yes.
everything that you tell them, they're like listening and soaking it in and paying attention. And it's like, oh my goodness, if I tell you something and you latch on, or if you see me do something when I'm having a bad day and you latch on to that, then it's
Yes.
like, oh my goodness, I did that.
Yeah, don't remember that. Well, that's how it is being a celebrity too, because you know, you may be having a bad day, but you can't have a bad day out in public, because one person is going to see you and that's the only time they've ever seen you possibly, and they're going to remember that moment and think you're, you know, a jerk or a, you know, not a nice person.
Totally.
So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with fame.
Yeah, 100%. So you thought you wanted to do the behind the scenes thing, but you ended up being a teacher. When you graduated high school and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go to school, like was there ever a thought of, you know what, maybe I'm, what is the word that they use now? Nepo baby. Like maybe,
Yeah.
because I'm a Nepo baby, I might, try to go into this because, hello, I'm the grandchild of Roy and Dale.
No, I never thought that. Ever. Never. And you know what? There was a time when I was embarrassed about them, because my girlfriends, you know, fifth and sixth grade girls, even into junior high, they can be a little catty and a little
They're
bit,
mean. No, not a little catty. They're
well,
mean. They're
well, yeah.
mean. Like I think that honestly, that's one of the reasons I never had kids, because I might have a 12-year-old girl and she'd be like, "Well, you know what, Dad?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about yourself." And I'd be like, "Ah!"
No. Yeah, it's they could be mean. Yeah, and the boys, sometimes the younger boys in grade school, they want to like tease you about something and it sounds mean, but they really like you, but they're just trying to get your attention. So like my grandpa was the subject of a lot of teasing and a lot of preconceived ideas as to what kind of person I was. So girls would
Well,
think,
because
oh, she thinks she's just so great, and we don't want to, you know
but
her.
also they weren't cool. I mean, like your grandparents, in terms of like, if you're like 8, like they weren't cool,
Well,
right?
back then they were. I mean,
Okay.
because it was a different day. Now people go, Roy, who's that? I mean, if anything, it's true. It's so weird. I mean, if anything, they know he's a drink. You know, you can order a Shirley Temple or a Roy Rogers.
Roy Rodgers, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that
And
cool?
yeah,
That's like kind of cool. I'm gonna walk into a bar and be like, I want to order a John Henry Smith. And they're
yeah.
gonna
And they're gonna look at you like, yeah, okay, right. Well, you know, we took my son when he was 4 to a restaurant and we were eating and I noticed on the menu there was a Roy Rogers on the menu, and I said, "Hey Taylor, there's a drink here named after Grampy." And he said, "Can I have it?" I said, "Sure." So the server came back to our table and he very seriously said, "I'd like a Grampy, please." And I said, no. You have to say his name. You have to say a Roy Rogers." Yeah, we had to get that kind of down before we tried that again at the next restaurant. But um, yeah, so it's interesting things happen when your grandpa's a drink. So
I love it. So
weird, just weird experiences.
So, so no one else in the family, from what I understand, you're the first person who's written about their story from the family's perspective. So, like,
Actually, I'm
what?
the first one that's written it from a grandchild's perspective, because my
Okay.
uncle and my aunt have written books, and it's been a while since those books came out. But there's a special relationship between a grandparent parent and a grandchild that's different than a mom or dad. And
Totally.
it was very, very special to me, my relationship with my grandparents. And for a while I was even closer to my grandmother than I was my own mom, because they've already done the child rearing, they've already been the parent, and they don't have to get so upset about things that their grandchildren say, because they're not the parent anymore. They're a really good sounding board.
Yeah,
And
there's a distance between the
yeah,
two
there's
of you.
distance between them.
That's a healthy distance. And so it's
Yes.
like, okay, you'll get through that. But
Yeah.
here's what I
Yes.
want to tell you.
Yes. So I just have so many great memories. And at first I thought, well, I don't have enough to fill a book. Well, pretty soon I started writing down all the small stories and times I had with them. And pretty soon I had 33 stories. And I thought, well, I have a book here. I didn't mean to, but I do have a book. And the great thing is you don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can pick it up and read one story, and it's all encapsulated just in itself.
Yeah.
Um, and they're really good memories for me. So I'm glad I did it.
So as you've been, going on the trail,
Yes.
with with your book.
I like that. You're getting into the theme. I like the theme of it. Go ahead.
100%. As you've been going on the trail with your book, what do you find? Like, are you finding that, like, you meet people and they're like, oh, like, kind of like I said, I talked to my mother earlier today and I said, oh my goodness, do you remember Roy and Dale Rogers? And she's like, of course, happy tales
Yes.
to you. Like, do you find?
Yes, absolutely. And that's
Do-
that era.
yeah.
I find that most people that come up and talk to me are the ones that are older that remember him and remember her. And I find it sad a little bit that the younger generation doesn't know them. And I would hope that at some point, just because it's an easy read and I've been told it's engaging or whatever, that younger people would want to pick it up and read about them, because they really did change a lot of the landscape of the culture before we even knew it.
How so?
Well, people used to put kids with Down syndrome in institutions and just,
Mhm.
go back home and forget they even had them, or just visited them in the hospital or whatever. And my grandparents had this little girl, Robin, and the doctor said, well, where are you going to put her? And grandpa was like, well, what do you mean, where am I going to put her? We're going to take her home.
You're gonna put her in her
And
bedroom.
yeah, I mean, that was unheard of back then. And people were embarrassed to talk about it. And my grandparents were really bold, and they spoke out about Down syndrome and their little girl and how much they loved her and how much she changed their family. And all of a sudden, all these families with kids with special needs started coming out to their rodeos, and he started noticing it. And so grandpa asked that all of the arenas where they performed would save those first few rows around the bottom, the front rows, for those families. So then afterwards they could stay on their horses and side pass along the railing and shake hands and take pictures and talk to these families. So they really changed the way that America viewed kids with special needs. And
Oh,
and that hadn't been done before. And
yeah.
so they were very they had a lot of, what do you call it, just
Progressiveness.
yeah. And they really cared about people, and they were always involved in charities and ways to help people. And it wasn't done before they did. It wasn't done to have a multicultural family like that either. They were
Yeah.
very progressive to have all those different cultures in one family, and nobody thought to do that. And they didn't do it on purpose. Oh, well, we need now we need somebody from South America. Now we need somebody from, they weren't looking that way, but they just followed their heart, and it happened to be just very multicultural, which shows they didn't view culture, color, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, as any kind of an issue at all.
So
And
how did all of these children come into their lives? Was it like when they were traveling for work and all of a
yeah.
sudden they would like run into a child who they're like, "Oh my God, I'm in love with this kid."
Oh, and
And
I'm
like
gonna just
you need to
just swipe him off the street and take him home. No, they did not do that. But they
I'm
visited
just
so many.
thinking about like what's her name? Josephine Baker and her Rainbow Tribe. How she was, she's like, and you come in and you come in and
No, it didn't exactly happen that like that. They used to do a lot of performing at children's hospitals, visiting children's hospitals, orphanages. They were very child oriented because they loved children. So they were at a lot of places that had a lot of children. And so they started noticing that all these children needed adopting. And some of them had given up hope that they would ever be adopted. Like my aunt Mimi, she was already 12 and she had given up hope because by the time you're 12, if you haven't been adopted, there's a pretty slim chance that you will be. That,
yeah, it's like a 12-year-old cat.
yeah, I mean, who
Like
wants,
it like it, yeah.
never
No,
heard
I
it.
mean, I know it sounds horrible to say, but it's like the same thing. It's like, oh, I don't want that. No, totally. I
Right,
totally
who's
get
gonna
that.
adopt, this one or that one. And
So
so,
your father, but here's my question. So your father, right? Because he's he's Dale's first child.
right,
How did he feel about that? Because
he
I
loved
because
it.
I say this as like an only child. If all of a sudden I had all these other kids, I would have an issue.
Yes,
I
and
would
you know what?
totally have an issue.
Well, I have to say that the younger ones did. The ones who were from grandpa's first marriage had a harder time than my dad because my dad was already in college by the time they started adopting all these kids. So he was pretty
Okay, so he
well,
was like an adult and
yeah,
he's
he
like,
was pretty
yeah.
well on his way to be out of the house. And so he was fine with it. But my Uncle Dusty, my Aunt Cheryl, um, it was harder for them because Aunt Cheryl had just lost her mom and she was aware that her mom had died after having Dusty as a baby. And so when grandma came in, she was very territorial. My Aunt Cheryl was saying, this is my mommy's furniture. This is not yours. And, she was very, it was hard for her.
Yeah.
And so what was really kind of cool was my grandma would go to my dad and confide and talk to my dad and they got really really close, and as adults they had a really sweet relationship and they were very close. um
Yeah.
so it worked out really well. I mean, it really did.
And so how close is the family now? Like, is everyone like, do you guys all get together in Chatsworth and like have
Oh,
hoedowns?
I wish we could say we did. It's just when grandma and grandpa passed away, the hub just kind of fell out of the center, because that's where we went for all of our gatherings. They sold the ranch to Val Kilmer's family, and they lived in the Chatsworth Ranch after my grandparents did. And nowadays we have to kind of travel all over the country because I have, Uncle Dusty's in Branson, my Aunt Cheryl's in Utah, my Aunt Dodie's in Alabama, and my Aunt Linda Lou's in Tennessee. So I mean, and so a lot of the families in California and now Nevada and Colorado and Arizona. I think I've hit about 10 states. And so, it's harder to get together, but we do the best
You
we
guys ever
can.
talked about doing like a big like family reunion
We have, and
and
we
like
were going to do that. We haven't heard, there's a musical that they were working on for a while too, of Ryan life. It was really good, and it was going to be a stage musical. That hasn't happened yet, and if and when that ever does, that will be a family reunion right there.
yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's so exciting. I think that that's so wonderful. Tell me about you. Are you an only child? Do you have siblings?
No, I have siblings. I have two older sisters, and so I grew up, we grew up singing because we were all very musical, and so we sang growing up. And I don't know how my dad got us to do that because, he was so corny. Oh my
He
gosh.
was like, "You're gonna be the new McGuires."
Oh, it
You're gonna
wasn't
be
anything like that. We had we had those little stick horses, those stick horses you run around on.
Yeah,
Yeah, we had
yeah.
those, and we had little cowgirl skirts with fringe. And my dad was all duded up in his Western gear, and he'd come in shooting the cap gun in the air, and he'd be riding our stick horses in. And I'm thinking how he got my sisters to do that when they were well into high school years. I have no idea because I was ready to stop this nonsense by fourth grade. Um, so, but you know what? It served us well because my sisters and I started a singing group some years back, and we sang at Carnegie Hall. We sang at the Grand Ole Opry, and we did, tours different places, and
That's
so
fabulous. What
yeah,
kind
so
of
it's
music?
fun.
What did you sing? Like, did you sing
Well, the
covers? Like, what kind of
obvious.
music did you guys sing?
Well, the obvious. My grandma wrote a lot of songs, and they had a lot of songs from their Western movies. So it was Western, and Western, is different than country. People try to lump it in and
Hmm.
say country Western, but it's really two different
Yeah,
things. Country is
totally.
totally different.
Tennessee is a
Western,
lot different than Wyoming.
yes, yes. And Western music is real twangy and very different than a country song. It's just old. It's a different genre. I'm sorry, that's not sounding very positive, but it's beautiful in its own right. Cool water and tumbleweeds and happy trails. That's Western. So it was a good experience. It was a good time.
Do you ever, teaching kids, right? Like in the fact that, because it's so weird now, because I always talk to, so I work with a writer, like, so I'm a vocalist, and like that's like where I started my career, and where
Oh,
my
so you
career is
sing?
always, I do. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I was talking to, so one of my, like, the person who does all of my writing for like my shows and things, we came up together because we did a show decades ago at this point. And we always talk about how being in our generation, because it was before social media, it was before the internet, it was when there was only three, you know, networks.
Stations, yeah, on TV.
We like, so things that our parents saw were things that we watched, right? Because we grew up on Nick at Night and
Right.
all of this thing. So we always, and I laugh because I say, well, your kids now, right? Because he has kids. I think his kid is like 10. And it's like, your kid isn't watching like reruns of Roseanne, because there's
Yeah,
so much. So
there's
I
so much.
wonder, so my question for you as an educator, and coming from this huge, rich musical legacy, do you throw Roy and Dale into your curriculum at all? Like, do you like like, so like at the end of like the last day of school, do all of your kids sing "Happy
You know what?
Trails" to you?
You know what? I have from time to time had like a cowboy week or a cowboy day, or I've taught them a little bit about what they stood for and some of the old, not just them, but the whole genre of westerns in TV and
Yeah,
movies. And it's fun, and they enjoy it because I can pull stuff up on YouTube about them, and they get excited to think, okay, that's your grandfather, and it kind of through the back door kind of gets them
like,
interested in them. And
yeah.
yeah, it
Is
sometimes.
Is it ever, and I don't want to like go down that road, but is it ever weird now because we're in the time that we are now, and people talk about like, like, oh, this is what this represents. This is what that,
Oh
like, is
yeah,
there
like
ever
it's
like
got,
a,
yeah. Well, sometimes now cowboys are uh viewed in a not so good light because, well, first of all, they have guns, and second of
mhm.
all, it's paired with Cowboys and Indians,
Indians?
and
Yeah.
that's not
That's what I
correct.
meant.
Yeah, and the whole thing with that. It's interesting though because my aunt is Native American, and she said she is not um offended when people refer to her as an Indian. Um
Yeah.
and it's interesting because she is Native American. And sometimes the people that you think you're standing up for aren't even as bothered by something as other people. But you know, she's not the general population. I understand that. But you know, I try to focus on not that, but I try to focus on the values and the morals that they taught through their shows and their movies and just their lives, because they lived it. They didn't just talk a good story. They actually were really, really good people and really kind-hearted and very, I mean, who you hoped they would be off screen was exactly who they were.
Oh,
And
that's exciting.
so they were wonderful people to grow up around, very positive. And so I always talk about that part.
How did they maintain that though? Because it's really hard to maintain a career in this business for
Oh, it's
that
very hard.
long of a period.
Right.
And was it a matter of them finding like their niche or niche, sorry,
Oh yeah,
their
what is it?
niche
Yes,
and
yes.
find and like and having that group of people, or was it like what like did they have a, because you know, again, like I said, my mother is like, oh my God,
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Like, was it a matter of like, was there a point where like they were everywhere, but then it like waned, but they had like this niche that kind of carried them on, or what, like what was that?
Well, the thing that really carried them through their hard times and really changed their whole outlook was, you know, really their faith in God, and they turned their lives over to following God and doing, you know, what they felt like was his will. Now, they didn't push it down people's throats, but they were very uh vocal about it if people asked them. And so that's why it was hard for me in the book not to mention their faith in God, because that was such a part of who they were. And it's so great because, like, you could talk to grandma and you could have a completely opposite view from her. You could be an atheist, and she would have a very interesting communicative talk with you. She would listen. She would want to know, tell me why you believe the way you do. I'm interested. I want to know. And she never was this person that was, oh, I'm so holy and I'm, you know, looking down on you and I'm better than you and here, let me tell you how to live. And she wasn't that way. And I mean, I think for myself, I think that's really how God wants us to live, not to, you know, be so judgmental.
Not to judge, just to be like, we're all here and
We're all here, and this is
we're here
what,
to learn from each other
yep,
and
yep,
have experiences with each other.
yeah. And so that's why they just built bridges and not walls. And I see so much, you know, so many walls that people build unnecessarily because we just need to just love, you know, just have kindness be
Yeah.
driving us rather than you know, focusing on the differences and the hate and all this other stuff. So they were very I'm so grateful to have had them as role models, because that was really, I think, the way that, you know, a Christian lives, is just loving people,
Yeah.
and anybody
Yeah.
really, not even, you know,
Yeah.
it was a really great upbringing that I had.
Yeah. How old were you when they passed?
I was 40 when grandpa died, and I was 43 when grandma died.
When did they pass?
Okay, so he died in 1998
Mhm.
and grandma died in 2001.
Okay.
And my kids knew them, and they were such young spirited grandparents that my kids remember them very well. And I had them for, you know, a lot of my adult life, and it was
That's
just,
really
yeah, it was great.
wonderful, right? Like I wasn't the when my grandparents passed, I wasn't at that age yet. But like I was still a young adult when my grandparents passed. But it's so awesome to know your elders as an adult right?
Yes,
Because
yes. Because
it's
you have a
different.
different relationship with them as an adult.
Totally. And the things that
Yeah.
they tell you, it's like, oh, you can
Yep.
totally absorb it in a
Uh-huh.
completely different way.
Yep. We had so many good talks, even when I was in my 20s and I'd come from college on the weekends just to spend the weekend. We'd sit around the table in the morning drinking our coffee and just talking about everything. And I learned so much from them. And I just miss them so much because she was like my gauge of
Yeah.
I could run things by her and I would feel so much better after we'd talk. And I
Yeah.
miss not having an elder person that's wise, that loves me fiercely, and I know is never going to turn their back on me because of something I've done or something. And I miss not having that constant person in my life because now
Yeah.
the older you get, the more you become that for somebody else that's
Right.
younger.
And you're like, God damn it.
But yeah, I don't have that myself. It's like I don't want to be the adult. Do I have to be an adult?
So you
Yeah.
wrote an entire book about both of them, but if like in a sentence or in a paragraph, if there was one thing that from each of your grandparents that you would love people to understand about them, or to a piece of wisdom from them that you could get, like what would that be?
If you want to feel more grounded in these times that we're in, um, I would go back and read this book or something else. Although this is more personal than all the other biographies about them. Um,
No,
about
you wrote it. You're supposed to say you should read this
Oh
one.
yeah, okay. So you should read well, I don't want to be like, I don't know, self-serving. But I mean, I really want people to know how relevant they are for today and how much fun that they were, but yet they were so wise, and so many lessons today we could be learned we could learn from how they related to me when I was growing up. They were really
Yeah,
ahead of their time.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
is interesting to see the balance of fame and anonymity. I lived on that bubble. I lived on that edge of their spotlight. And it is interesting to read about what it's like to go from, Julie, the schoolgirl or the mom or the soccer mom or whatever I'm doing, to all of a sudden, oh, now I'm here this weekend, Julie with Roy and Dale, and, I'm their granddaughter. And so now I'm in a different arena, and then you go back to being, it's kind of like Cinderella, and then you go back, to
You
washing
go back to your
the
own
next
little
days.
corner in your own little chair.
I mean, it's interesting because not many people have that experience of doing that,
Yeah,
of
totally.
experiencing fame, and then but being a normal person, a regular, teacher. So,
No, absolutely. Can I tell you, Julie, I could sit here and talk to you all day. You're
this
so
was
wonderful.
really fun. I know, I feel like that too. You need to keep my number and we need to do this again.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, it's so nice we had this time
Oh,
together.
here we're at. Here we come. I'm pulling my ear.
But so tell our audience the name of your book, where they can find your book, where they can find you. I mean,
Okay.
outside of PS 132.
Okay. Well, my book is called Your Heroes, My Grandparents, A Granddaughter's Love. And you can find it on Amazon in hardback and paperback, and also on Barnes and Noble. And you can also find me on Facebook if you can get through all the names that I have on Facebook. um, and then and I'm putting up a website as we speak. It'll be info@julierodgerspomilia.com. And
Awesome.
you can buy the book eventually there and have me sign it, and I'll send it back to you. So
Yay.
ask
Okay.
questions there.
Fantastic. And we're going to get all of this information from Julie, and we're going to put it on our website, showtimewithjordan.com. And thank you so much, Julie, for joining us. This has been such a wonderful treat to meet you and to get to know you. And I hope that we can continue to get to know each other.
I would
really
love
do.
that. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and ask me questions. It's been really a treat for me today. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank all of you out in Radio Land for joining us on Showtime with Jordan Van Hazel and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM, Las Vegas. Don't forget to download the Hot 702.5 FM app. And of course, you can, as always, listen to us wherever you catch your podcasts. And we will talk next week.